Hey guys, welcome to today's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest coming out of Los Angeles, Jacquiline Wagner. And she helps, she's the president of Wagner HR. And today's topic is all about workplace, emotional intelligence, managing leaders. And I'm really happy to have her on the show. So, Jacqueline, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, start off by introducing yourself and talking about what you do, how you got there, and I'm excited to dive into the conversation.
Terrific. So, I've been practicing employment defense for 25 years. I'm an attorney and I've only ever practiced employment law on behalf of employers, business owners, supervisors, human resources professionals. That's my client base. And I've spent 25 years both litigating employment matters and providing advice and counsel to employers to mitigate their risk in the employment law arena. And I've been very successful at doing that. I now focused on preventing lawsuits or at least reducing the risk of lawsuits for my employer clients.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic these days, especially with workplace culture, corporate culture. We'll start off by just broad is you talk about the role of emotional intelligence and leadership. And a lot of times there's this exit interview, or just basically there's stories of just employees just blowing up. They just quit, don't show up. How can leaders assess and improve their emotional intelligence? Why is it essential in today's business landscape?
Sure. So, first, let me set a sort of a backdrop about what emotional intelligence even is, and then I can explain why it's so important in as a leadership skill. The concept of emotional intelligence has been in the parlance of the psychology studies since the 1960s, but the term was made popular and put into common parlance by a workplace psychologist in the 1990s named Daniel Goleman. And he wrote a book in the 1990s by the same title, Emotional Intelligence. And he is now a renowned author. He's written, I think, 20 books. He's gone on tons of podcasts and shows and to basically argue that more important than someone's hard skills, their substantive skills in their career, finance or business management or any of the hard skills that a person brings to their workplace, more important to that as impactful to one's career trajectory is their ability to cultivate their own emotional intelligence. And there are five factors of emotional intelligence. He calls them components. And that is self awareness, empathy, self regulation, motivation, and social deafness. So, self awareness being a real ability to know what makes you tick, what makes you function, what are your own motivators, what are your soft, weak spots, where are your blind spots. Knowing that what makes you personally tick really helps you to be able to negotiate interactions with others. Having empathy with others, putting yourself in that person's shoes, the person that you're leading, being able to put yourself in their shoes and have empathy for them and understand their lived experience. That is a huge component, probably the most important component for a leader to be effective. Self regulation is the third component. That's the ability to keep yourself calm in a difficult or stressful situation and maintain leadership in a time when really what you want to do is go in your office, close the door, draw the blinds, and cry, right? Being able to keep calm, putting mechanisms in place for yourself way before a stressful event happens so that you're able to maintain calm, poise, leadership in those stressful moments. You also need to know what your own motivations are and then act on those motivations. If you need a pep talk from Chat GPT because you don't have a good support system, program Chat GPT to give you a support system. If you need an atta girl, you need to tell your boss you need an atta girl, right? Knowing what motivates you and then seeking out that motivation. And then social deafness is the ability to read a room, to the ability to navigate different personalities, having charisma, having the ability to speak in a way that the other person hears. Those skills are what's known as emotional intelligence. And I have found in 25 years of litigating employment law matters on behalf of employers, I really get to pop the hood and look under the hood of so many different organizations and figure out what is going on under the hood. So typically, I will get a lawsuit and I will go into the workplace and I'll pop the hood and try to see what's really the motivator behind this lawsuit. Because 9.9 times out of 10 in my 25-year career, what's really going on when an employee sues for discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, it's really because they were poorly led and they were led with a lack of emotional intelligence. So when an adverse employment action happens to that employee, they're left with no choice but to believe that what's really going on is discrimination, harassment, or retaliation instead of a performance issue that's legitimate. So it's incumbent upon the employer and leadership to cultivate their own emotional intelligence, if for no other reason than to reduce the organization's risk of getting sued for discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. That
Hmm.
was a very long explanation to your very simple question.
No, I think it's really good because it sets the stage. Dan Goldman's book, and that was really interesting. And yeah, so I know one thing I have a question for you is this employment litigation. How common is it? Is it like when I was growing up, it was fairly uncommon, and now like you hear basically everybody sues everybody for anything that happens. Is it 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%? Like what is how common is it?
It's getting to be more and more common. The EEOC processed, I want to say 70,000 complaints last year alone.
Mm,
It is becoming more and more common
mm,
because we're seeing a real shift in the way the workforce sees itself.
mm.
I grew up in an era during the Reagan era where it was bragging rights to work until you bleed from the eyeballs, right? It's a bragging right. People were literally doing cocaine to stay awake, to stay functional in the 80s. And that is the mindset of Generation X, which I'm a member of, is that you work until you die at the desk. And these younger generations are not at all programmed that way. They didn't grow up in the Reagan era. They didn't grow up with being your worth as a person is how much money you made last year. That is not how they're programmed
Mm,
because they were reared by Generation X, which is totally traumatized by that mindset. They were raised, we joke that everybody got a trophy when they played soccer, but it's true. They were given, they're really intelligent because they were given all of these support systems to function in a healthy way that we didn't receive. And so we see them as lazy, not driven. What the heck is going on? When in reality, they're the healthy ones and we're the unhealthy ones. And
mm,
so when you collide this multi-generational workforce together, you really see the dichotomy. And so if you want to be able to effectively lead Generation Z, I guess it is, you've got to step up and shift the way you lead, not manage, lead. A manager is rules from behind and doles out orders with a lack of really a direction, and they can see every little misstep of their workers because they're watching from behind. Whereas a leader leads from in front with a plan and says, let's go this way. And so it this new generation is really causing by force folks in my generation who are in leadership to shift the way they manage people, to shift the way they lead people for the better, for the better. It really is a necessary change. We saw it in the way we look at remote work. My generation saw COVID, quarantine, remote work as this manna from heaven. We couldn't believe we got to be in our pajamas working. We thought it was the greatest treat of all time. But the younger generation, they don't know any different. They're all working remotely. And then when the corporations are saying, come back to work or you're going to get fired, they're like, oh, okay, go ahead and fire me. I'll just find another job. That didn't work on my generation. That worked on my generation to scare tactics. It's not working on the new generation. So employers really have to cultivate emotional intelligence to keep those kids at the table.
Yeah, really insightful. And I think a lot of the younger generation, Gen Alpha, Gen Z, because of the internet and because of smartphones and social media, they have the ability to have any platform, and they look down on Gen X and baby boomers from the industrial age living these mantras that were just work 50 years, go to
Yep.
school, all this. And they
Work
actually,
50 years for the same organization. That used to be a bragging right. You get your gold watch when you retire. And now young people are like, I don't need a watch. What I need is childcare paid for. What I need is to remotely work. What I need is flexibility in my schedule. And the leaders in Gen X are going, what the heck? What a bunch of pansies. But look, that's your workforce. And you can either go with the grain or against it. And it's going to be a lot easier for you to lead folks if you come to the table and give a little, because you're going to get a lot more productivity when you give a little.
yeah. And the icing on the cake is, what are the top 5 things employers can do to leverage emotional intelligence to reduce the risk of employees walking off, employment litigation, the negative ramifications?
Yeah. So if you are using your foundation, if you're thinking about building a house and you got to set your foundation, that foundation should be emotional intelligence. Everything the organization does needs to be steeped in cultivating emotional intelligence, not only of leadership, but also of the workforce. That's first. Then on that foundation, there are 4 pillars: employee handbooks, training, conflict resolution program, and investigations. So those 4 pillars are mechanisms by which the organization can communicate with its employees about the climate and culture so that they want to stay in the chair, so that they feel valued, seen, and heard, so that when you give them negative feedback, constructive criticism about their performance, they're hearing it as constructive criticism instead of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. So employee handbooks are the first entree for an employer to communicate with their employees, not only about expectations of performance or the rules and regulations under which the person will be employed, but also it's an opportunity, the first opportunity for an employer to communicate to the employees what the climate and culture of the organization is going to be. That's your opportunity to say out loud on paper in black and white, Emotional intelligence is a value of this organization. We expect you to cultivate your emotional intelligence, and we are going to be cultivating our emotional intelligence as well. And laying that foundation right out of the so that you're wowing the employee right away. And you're developing that into all of your policies and procedures and into maybe an employee initial training, a welcome day for employees, going over the employee handbook and all the forms. And then I recommend training for employees, consistent, robust utilization of training to continue communicating the climate and culture with your employees. Training isn't just about how to use this new software, or we have to do sexual harassment prevention training because it's required by law, or somebody used the microwave to burn popcorn again. Let's have a training about that, right? Your training mechanism isn't just about those things, although you can use training to communicate with your employees, but it's also a way to communicate climate and culture, the absolute requirement that climate and culture, that emotional intelligence is woven into climate and culture. The fourth pillar is conflict resolution. Conflict resolution, like in an informal way, when you've got a personality conflict between two peer employees. I don't like Samantha because she likes this artist, or she said this about me, or the rumor mill, or what have you. If you have an informal conflict resolution program by a neutral third party person coming in to play mom or dad between the two employees, you're communicating to your employees that they are valued, seen, and heard, and how they feel is important, and that the organization has empathy, and that it's expected that they are going to be valued, seen, and heard. It's a huge communication tool to your employees to communicate their value. And then I also recommend conducting workplace investigations, not just when it's legally required. If there's a harassment claim and you have to bring in a neutral third party to conduct an investigation, those are really important investigations and they're legally required. But I'm also talking about investigations when there's an allegation that someone was unkind, someone was rude, someone was not the leader was not effectively communicating that the employee was valued, seen, and heard. And the way that you tie this to a performance expectation for your leadership is part of their performance evaluation at the end of the year. How did you personally cultivate your own emotional intelligence, and how did that trickle down to your employees? Now, a person shouldn't be evaluated on whether they are emotionally intelligent. They're evaluated on how well they're cultivating their own emotional intelligence, the effort to cultivate their emotional intelligence. So with those pillars and the foundation of emotional intelligence, an organization should be able to effectively reduce their risk significantly of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation claims.
I know we have around this 2, 3 minutes, and I love your really elaborate responses. One thing, I was having dinner with a colleague of mine, and he's a founder, and we were talking about employees don't show up, or employees quit, or employees steal, and all this stuff. And he was saying, he can't wait till AI gets really good, so he doesn't have to have employees. He can have AI systems, he can have AI bots, he can have AI software that can do 20 times what a human can do, and like cost like 99% less. So how do you think AI is playing into this? And I know you're a lawyer, but I'm just curious about your thoughts if you had any.
I do. So AI is absolutely going to be effective and useful for some of the more mundane tasks that employees are required to perform. My view is that employers would be remiss if they relied solely on AI and lacked that human. That's going in the opposite direction
Wow.
of cultivating emotional intelligence. Because without that human experience, the organization is really going to be lacking. And if the organization is relying heavily on AI instead of human beings,
Mhm.
they're going to even more be lacking in emotional intelligence.
Mhm.
I think that the human experience is very valuable to assist an employer in seeing its blind spots, how it can be better. We're not there with AI, and I don't know if AI will ever be sentient or able to have emotion. But if your client are human beings and they have emotion, and you're relying heavily on AI to accomplish human function instead of just the mundane tasks, I think you're going to experience in the long run a problem. Maybe in the short term, it seems really great, but I think the argument can be made that you would see your client base start to dwindle without that human experience.
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight that opposite extreme because you were talking about extreme emotional intelligence and empathy, and then I wanted to highlight
Yeah.
contrast and somewhere in the middle, part AI, part human. That's that sweet spot. How can people find you? People are running companies and they want to reduce the risk of employment litigation. How can they check out your work, follow you, reach out to you?
Thank you. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, but my website is probably the best way to reach me, and that is www.wagner, Wagner, HR, as in human resources, wagnerhr.com.
Yeah, I love that, and really enjoyed this conversation. And I really loved your top five things, as well as the Daniel Goleman. And for the audience, all of these resources will be in the links, and be sure to give Jacqueline's socials a like and follow. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. This was a